Hello, folks. This is Michael Broussard. Welcome to Survivor Stories. Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor does this periodically, where we interview survivors and give them the opportunity to tell their stories. This is something you can do too. You can contact us, and that information will be at the end of this presentation if you want to tell your story. Our guest tonight is Michael Skinner, who has very graciously agreed to tell his story and to answer your questions. When you want to ask a question, all you need to do is go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, click where it says Q&A, and type in your question. And we'll get to as many of those as we can as we proceed through the presentation. I would like to say welcome to Michael Skinner. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Michael, and thank you folks for showing up.
This is an unusual thing, but usually I ask a question first, but you know what? There's already two people in the Q&A, and I wonder what they have to say.
Okay. What do they have to say?
My friend Yona, who's awesome, says, hello, Michael ×2. And Larry says, greetings. So hello, Yona. Is Larry a friend of yours? You know anyone named Larry? Hi, Larry.
I do. I
know a few people named Larry, so it could be 4 or 5 different people.
Right.
But hi, Larry. So the first thing I want to ask you is if you would please share some of your story, the abuse you experienced, in as much or as little detail as you choose.
Okay. Many years ago, because obviously I'm a older citizen at this point in my life, I experienced a lot of abuse, and it involved, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. There was neglect, and my main perpetrators were both of my parents. And I didn't have the language back then to know what was what or whatever, but they also had circles of friends who were equally abusive as them. So later on in life, I learned this was just, groups of pedophiles, and then people pointing out to me that, Michael, you were trafficked. I never thought of that. So it happened. I always refer to my father's group of friends as thugs because they were all big guys. They were brutal. One of them was thrown off the police force. It was either Boston, Massachusetts, or Somerville back in the late 60s for brutality. So he had to have been a really bad character. And my father thought that was like a badge of honor that he was thrown off for the brutality that he inflicted upon folks of color, hippies back in the day, and all that good stuff. My mother's circle of pedophile friends, she belonged to a church. So there was that. So I had criminal element, and then I had those that could quote scripture. So it was a mixed bag, and it was very confusing and very debilitating. But for me to get through that, I think intrinsically we know how to heal, and there's something inside of us. For me, when we moved out of the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, up to Billerica, which was a suburb, maybe 18, 20 miles away, back in those days, I mean, there was fields, there was forests, streams. That was my go-to place for hiding and respite and just being in nature. The other thing was music, always listening to music, just listening. I loved everything. That was one thing about my parents. They loved music, and she was actually a gifted singer. She used to sing in school in different plays, and she was an actress in local theater community groups, and also in the choir, the church choir. She did have a beautiful voice, but their record collection was extensive, from Sam Cooke to Elvis, Dean Martin, the whole everything. So I loved music, and so that was two things that were very huge for me, was music and nature. So that helped get me through that trauma and abuse, because it was nonstop. Yeah. So I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or thoughts or where folks want to go with this.
You talked about, your mother sang, if I heard you correctly, and they had an extensive music collection. And I know that music is a major part of your life because you yourself are a talented musician. Did you have to do any sort of emotional labor later on in life to kind of separate the music from the abusers?
Yes. And it was only years later understanding. And I've seen it in other friends that I've known who've been impacted by whatever the type of trauma or abuse and their own creativity. But for me, I saw the Beatles, I think it was 9 years old, on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that was just like transformative. I wanted to go into the military. That was my fun. I already knew that's what I was going to do. I saw them, Michael and folks, and that was just a transformative moment. It was just huge. And this shy little timid boy blurted out, I want to be like them. I want to play the guitar and sing. I was just so excited seeing that. This was like magic. Of course, there were tens of thousands of others like me doing the same thing. Well, my parents, my father, the F word was before every adjective. You're stupid, you're worthless, you never amount to anything. And my mother's condescending was, who do you think you are? You can't do that. And here was a woman who had a beautiful voice. And she was always telling me if I tried to sing. So they crushed that dream, that idea of wanting to play the guitar and sing. So yes, it impacted there. But later on, I realized as I'm listening to the transistor radio or the records, I was always tapping along to the songs and I could anticipate the drum roll, and I had really good timing and written. And I said, aha, I can be a drummer. So I started listening really and just practicing on, playing on every counter, every surface. And the local band needed a drummer. And so I joined the band as a drummer. And by the time I was 12 years old, we were playing at parties and junior high dances and being paid. And that was cool. So I went on to become a professional musician as a drummer. And that's how I made a living for a good part of my life, even supporting a stay-at-home mom years ago with 3 kids, bought a home as a musician. Again, touring as a drummer. Later in life, when the trauma came back to really kick my butt and, the breakdown, the breakthrough, if you will, this was back in 93 and 94, I just started thinking, I want to play the guitar. And as I was picking it up, I realized there was a block. I had never picked up the guitar, even though I worked in bands. I worked with some incredible guitar players who could have taught me all kinds of things. There was an emotional block that I would not pick up the guitar because they told me I couldn't do it. This time around, I said, frick you, I'm going to do it. And so most of what you've seen me and others doing now is playing the guitar and singing, but I'm pretty good at that. But really, drumming was always my main gig because I started doing that at the age of 10. So I finally broke that block. But that was a huge victory. And I didn't have to go out and perform to be paid or whatever, just to play. I play in the living room. I play in this room. I practice. I just love playing. Playing the congas. I have a music room. I can sit down at my drum set. So I was blessed. I was grateful for having a career in music. Wish I could have done more. Yes, but the trauma got in the way. But I broke that block of them telling me that I could not play the guitar. And it took many years later in my mid-40s to make the connection why I wasn't playing the guitar. It's because they told me I couldn't do it.
That is absolutely monumental to have found that, seen it for what it was, and broken that through that barricade, through that blockade that they created. So I am duly impressed with you as a survivor and as a thriver. Before we go on, we have a bunch of questions. Let's see what people have to say. Well, Kathleen says hello, guys. We like Kathleen. She's awesome. Hello, Kathleen.
Oh, I see my friend Jasik is here.
Jasik says, no chat, so hi, Michael. Hi, Jasik. I mean, you're not my friend, but I like you anyway.
Okay, there are some questions.
Oh, and Penelope says, hi, Michael, thank you for all that you do. That's for you or for me or for both of us. We're both awesome. So Larry says, same here, music and the forest were my refuge. These provided me with a refuge. Do you still see nature as a refuge?
Yeah, and then we'll go to Neely's question. Yes,
Okay.
it is huge. This is my home. I was able to purchase a home again after going through divorce and all the rest of that stuff. I have a modest home. I have a modest front yard, backyard, side yard, but behind me is this huge forest with the river. It's the county land. So I see eagles in the morning. I see hawks. I see deer. Sometimes I see bear. I see coyotes. I see every kind of bird. I put bird feeders out. That is still my go-to thing. Every morning I go out, regardless of the weather, 365 days a year, I go out with my 2 cups of coffee. The first one, I'm standing up looking down. The second one, I go over in my backyard, and there's a section where it juts into the forest, and I have a chair there. And I just sit there immersed amongst the trees, and I'm just staring off at the river, the trees. If a bird flies by, if I see a coyote or wild turkeys, great. If not, I'm just happy. So nature is still my go-to thing for healing. And it's every morning when I come home at night, during the day. Tonight, when we're done with this, I'll have a cup of tea and I'll go out in the backyard and just stare up at the stars and the trees. So yes, nature is still a huge component for me in healing.
That is beautiful, because you talk about staring up at the stars. Nature doesn't always work for me, because sometimes it's just too much and I can't get out. But when I do get out, it does help me immensely, because there's a peace about that. It doesn't work for everybody, though. That's a reality. It works for you, works for me, probably works for a lot of other people. Some people, not so much. So yes, we'll go on to Neely's question. Michael, did you feel that you had anyone you could trust with your story as the abuse was happening? If not, how long did it take for you to find someone you could trust with your story?
No, Neely, there was no one. I did have a 4th grade teacher that took interest in me, and he was always asking me questions about my parents. And this was huge for me, because he was a gentleman, but he was also a Korean War veteran. And I was sharing with him I wanted to go into the military, and he told me, you can go to West Point. They want smart people like you. So he was building me up, but he was also always asking questions about my parents. And then he'd have to have me stay after class to help him in his class. And at first, when he asked me, I thought, oh, this is great. And then it was like, uh-oh, what's he going to do? But he was just a gentleman, a kind man. He'd drive me home, drop me off, and then I'd run into the house and look behind the curtains, and he's still sitting there looking up at the house. So no, I could never tell anyone what was happening. I was too afraid. My parents were scary people. My father used to talk about what he did to people. If you owed a gambling debt or loan sharking, he was one of the people that came to see you. And he had no problem sharing with me, nor did my mother have problems in sharing with me what he did to people. I was terrified of that man, and her. So no, I told no one. But that one 4th grade teacher, because that was like, wow, this guy's a nice guy. My father's a Korean War veteran. Why is he a jerk? Why is he so cruel? But no, I could not tell anyone. And I did not finally tell anyone till years later. It was my ex-wife. This was back in '92, when I just started talking about the physical abuse. Would I talk about the sexual abuse? Absolutely not. No way whatsoever. would talk about the physical abuse, I had some girlfriends in high school would start asking me, why do you have bruises all over you? I reconnected with some of them years later, and they always felt that they knew I was getting the crap kicked out of me, but I wouldn't say that to them. So no, I had no one to tell. I that stayed with me till the age of 39 when I had the breakdown. Then finally my ex took me to a counselor, and then I started sharing. So it was a lifetime of keeping that bottled up.
Wow. Jasek or Jack is saying, Michael, at what point were you able to identify and draw some positive learning value from these horrible abuses, and what did it take?
When I was attending, this was in the 80s, because my life was going out of control. I was still performing. I owned a music business. I represented bands. I had a sounding lighting company. I was happily married. But my ex was saying, Michael, you're not happy. And I wasn't happy. I was a workaholic. So I was in the martial arts, to control that rage that was burning up inside. But I started going to adult children of alcoholics meetings. And that's where I was hearing folks share about healing. So that started like, oh, so little by little in those groups, I could, listen and absorb and draw. And then, but people would start talking about their sexual abuse. And then that was like the fingernails going on the chalkboard. I wanted to run for the hills. So they were giving me inspiration. But Jasek, when I actually had my breakthrough, and started attending peer support groups and for mental health at the peer support agencies, even NAMI support groups, and then I'd drive into Boston or Cambridge to go to support groups for survivors of child abuse or sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. I drew inspiration from those folks, and that's where the whole surviving spirit came from. I was listening to people who'd been through hell and then some, who maybe still were immersed in hell, but still were showing this great courage. I just saw them as courageous people. They deserved a Medal of Honor just like anybody else for what they've been through. They were giving me inspiration. They emboldened me, and that was in the initial thing. I then had a career as an advocate and a musician, speaking all around the country and stuff. And I've met hundreds of thousands of people that they still inspire me. So do I still feel down and low and yeah, but then I just need to see a story, or I see someone's Facebook chat or something, or I read an article, I read a book, and that I'm just like, no, these surviving spirits, because as you said, they've survived these different horrors, whatever it is, but they've learned to thrive, whatever that is for them. So yeah, they're my heroes,
And you are a
me.
hero
And
to
so
me
that's
and to many other people.
what I took from it. And again, learning to be better, not bitter. I am angry as all heck at what my parents did to me. I don't hate them. I don't forgive them. I feel bad for them because I know their childhood was horrible. They didn't break the cycle. So part of my little thing is raising awareness to break the intergenerational trauma, because they were both hard workers. They had skills. They had all the rest of this stuff, but this crap got in the way, and then they impacted their 5 children. So.
But I think it's important for you to know, you talk about these people who have inspired you and who help you to thrive and to heal. You're doing the same thing for other people. Certainly that was the first reaction I had to you when I saw the work that you do online. While we're talking about it, could you please tell people what the website is for Surviving Spirit?
That's real simple. It's survivingspirit.com. I also have survivingspirit.org. The main thing that I'm focused on with that now is the newsletter. There was a time, there was a lot more to it. It's still a nonprofit. I just don't pursue that anymore. I had a great board. We used to focus on other survivors who are creative and showcase their books, their creative arts, music, whatever it was, and sell them. They may make handcrafted, oven mitts, whatever it was to just show that people can get through this. We have a life. And then through time, the website needs revamping. My dear friend, he's dealing with some physical health issues, and I don't have the technical expertise to bring that up to speed. But the one thing I do keep up is the newsletter. So that has always been about sharing resources about trauma, abuse, and mental health. And it runs the gamut. I'm inclusive. I've never been exclusive. I've never just focused on, healing sexual abuse. It's mental health. It could be traumatic brain injury. It could be a multitude of things that people are dealing with. Are people just getting out of prison? What are folks doing in the prison system to make a better life for themselves and others? Whatever comes across my thing, and I say, oh, that's cool, I'm going to share that. So I try to keep it balanced and mixed with a little of everything, but always at the core, including someone, their art. I know in February I'll be sharing my friend Bonnie Shell. She just released a book. It's a Mad Woman in the Southwest, but I like to think of her, she paved the way for a lot of us later on in life. So, I'll share her book. I've shared other people's books, their music, their art, if are they having an art exhibit, whatever, but also things on healing. I just try to be well-rounded with it.
I do find what you do very, very inspirational. And every time I see a post by you, you're always saying something that hits me the right way at the right time. So I truly appreciate that, because, we go through things. Let me look at some other questions we have. Larry says, your thoughts on nature resonate with me. When I was a street kid in San Francisco, I used to hang around the docks and bark at the sea lions. It felt like this was one part of the world where I could feel acceptable, or at least not worthless. That's amazing to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't see the sea lions until many, many, many years later, because I never, I wasn't going to get out of the town I was in because I was on welfare. We weren't going anywhere. But years later, I got to San Francisco, and it's a humbling experience being out there watching the sea lions. It's a beautiful connection. It's a beautiful connection. Not to answer your question, my apologies. It just washed over me, and I wanted to say it. Neely says, I'm so sorry, Michael.
Thank you, Neely. Thank you all for being here.
Talia says, hi, Michael and Michael. I have so many questions and thoughts. First, I am intrigued how you still went into music, even though your love of music became such through your abusers, who were lovers of music too, but not the guitar, because you associated that with them telling you that there was no way you would be like a Beatle. What do you think is the reason that you stuck with music, even though I assume it was associated with some horrible memories and horrible people? Well, I think we've talked about that, but if you do have anything to add there.
I had some pretty good success as a drummer. I got to tour Great Britain. We went over for a 3-month tour. It ended up being there 2 years. I lived in Liverpool, the home of the Beatles that inspired me. I got to play in many of the same venues that the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Nazareth, all that. So I felt horrible inside, despite whatever I had done in life as a musician. No matter what, I still always felt horrible inside. But when I was drumming, I was just in another world with the band. I would just get locked in. It was a spiritual high. I don't want to be crass, but we would come off the stage, and this was a band we had. It was called Train, not Train Today. This was back in 76 and 77. And we were just emotionally spent. And it wasn't from drugs or alcohol. It was just, we connected with the crowd, whether it was a crowd of 200 or a crowd of 1,200. It was just, it was a high. And I never did drugs. I drank too much as a young person, but I didn't do that while gigging. The gigging was, I was a professional. I didn't want to mess that up. So there was a spiritual connection when a band is clicking and the audience is clicking with you. It's beautiful. So that was a drug for me. I wanted that. So I I gigged every night. I've had thousands of gigs under my belt, but every time was great. It was just, oh, I just get locked into playing with a band. I love playing the guitar and singing. I love it. But when I'm drumming with a band and I can just lock into a groove and, there's 4, 5, 6 people doing something, that's just magical to me.
I actually know what you mean. Although I'm not a drummer, I've been a singer, songwriter up front with a band. And there is something about when you're all locked in together, no matter what piece of that you are, there's something just incredibly intoxicating about being locked in there. I had a drummer who was with me for several bands, and he was an unusual kind of drummer who heard everything and heard the singer and actually did fills and reactions to me as well as everything else. And so it became one organic thing we were creating. And I feel the same way coming off of stage. It was so incredible. And we had people, it was, I think, later than when you did it, but we had people who were singing our songs. We had people who would rush up to the microphone and people who would talk to me afterwards about the songs and what they meant to them. And people who you saw, they were in that moment when you were playing. And that is an incredible feeling, an amazing feeling. And it's an ascendant feeling that took me beyond the abuse and beyond the feelings of my own limitations, Neely says, could you talk about the difference you felt between letting anger out through martial arts versus music and nature?
Yes. Again, so full disclosure here and transparency, and music, as you've heard, was my go-to. The other thing as a young person was drinking. The other thing was sex and fighting. I was very proficient at fighting. I looked for every bully. If someone was picking on someone, I used to go in the bar. I didn't know that that rage was explosive. Years later, I went into the martial arts. Oh, this is how good I was as a fighter. I was approached to become a professional boxer, and they thought I could be the next heavyweight champion. And I weighed that for a bit, and I said, no, this is crazy. I want to go back. I got to be a musician. I had to get away from it because I was getting in too much trouble. Even though the people I was fighting, the cops were actually complimenting me for hurting them. And I'm not proud of that. It was just, I was 18, 19, 20. I did not know why I had this rage. I should have hit my parents instead of these other people. So going into the martial arts, now I'm married. I've got, and I used to box when I was younger, but it didn't get away. So going into the martial arts, the teacher, and that's not the correct word I should be using for him, but I'm drawing a blank here.
Sensei.
Thank you. He
I
was,
did it too.
yeah, he was explosive. But he went through the whole thing. It was, learned all the different things. For me, it was, I just needed to get that rage out. And he would start it with, if it's not life-threatening, walk away. He opened up class with that. He ended with class with that. And of course, he was his whole spirit. It was all the martial, so it was all the forms, all the different things. But he was very spiritual in his approach to this. And of course, when I first started hearing this, I'm in my head, I'm saying, that's a bunch of bull, because my father's teaching to me, if anyone says anything, take them out right away, destroy them. Those were my father's words. Now I'm hearing from this man that was skilled, and I respected, and he's saying, walk away if it's not life-threatening. And I found it was a way that I could start channeling the rage out. The drumming, years later, I learned was also a way that I was pummeling, I was doing a cadence. So that was also helping me to get rid of the rage, but it wasn't enough. So the martial arts for me helped, pounding a body bag, sparring with people, full contact. That was, it was protect, we had the gear on and stuff, but now I was like, okay, that helped me to, then I started grasping little by little that I'm just angry how my parents treated me, and I've been getting in fights for all the wrong reason all those years. So the martial arts helped channel that, but it was my sensei that helped me to learn to channel that in a more constructive manner.
I'll just briefly insert here that my experience with martial arts was fairly recent. It was in the last few years, and it was because my health has been so poor all my life. And I was, well, actually, it's going to be before that because it was before the pandemic, but for several years. And I was trying to find something that I would be accountable to, as opposed to just saying, well, you should exercise. I'm not good at that. I needed to be accountable to somebody. So I decided to sign up for karate lessons. And that's when I learned the spirituality, the centering of it, that it wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about violence. It was about form. It was about peace. It was also about the discipline of yes sensei. I saw so many young kids who would be training at the same time as me, and they would keep questioning the sensei as to why they should do something. That's not the way that works.
Right.
The words you're looking for are yes, sensei, and then you do it. And for me, that gave me an internal discipline that helped me a lot in healing and in centering emotionally.
Yeah.
Larry says, do you find that it's often difficult to tell what the impact of CSA has been when a kid has been living in a situation that's chaotic in so many other ways? Like, what causes what?
It is confusing because as I opened up, I had different types of abuse. And one thing I have learned to learn about how trauma has impacted us, that for me has been helpful. That it's not a comparison, it's not one-upmanship. The trauma that you experienced, whether it was emotional, whether it was neglect, was it physical, sexual abuse, all of the above, it has an impact on you as a person. What I've learned is if you didn't have anyone supportive in that time period, how that just makes it a lot harder and difficult to heal. Doesn't mean you can't get there, but it's just going to take the journey a little bit longer, maybe a little more bumps. For me, this is just for me answering, Larry, for childhood sexual abuse. And Michael, I touched upon this a little bit before we started this information session here. I've always felt as a child that a piece of me was cut out. And part of me, I don't want to be gross, but I always felt like part of me was disemboweled as a child from the childhood sexual abuse. That wound is still there. It is always there. I still feel a part of me is missing. I survived. I have learned to I've learned to thrive. I have peace. I have had love in my life. I have happiness. I have joy, but there is a piece missing in my soul. And I think that's what's hard for some folks to understand, that some of us feel that. And I'm not saying everybody, but that's how it is for me. Even as one who has had success in music, I've done okay in life. At the end of the day, I still have that hole that hurts. It still hurts. And I've learned to live with it. Do I like, again, this is where the mindfulness, I guess, it's here, it's with me. Do I like it? No, but I've learned to make peace with it and not to compare, because I do. Sometimes I get, well, how come they're doing this or they can do, and I just have that piece of me missing. I've had head injuries. My earliest traumatic brain injuries came at the hands of my father, what he did to me. And so every subsequent hit to my head or even accidents, falls, that has had an impact on me as a human being. So things happen. And yes, it has an impact, and it's had an impact upon me. But again, I have found a way to have peace in my life and joy. You
talk about that piece that's missing, that you've lost, a piece of your soul that you've lost because of what you went through. I wouldn't have described it that way, but you also talk about it being a constant in your life. In my life, it's a constant that no matter whether I'm happy or unhappy or whatever's happening, the abuse is still there. It still exists. It's still inside me. It's not that far away, which is not to say that I don't think I'm getting better and I don't think my life is good. I think my life is much better than it's ever been. But I think that's a hard thing sometimes to explain to people who had normal childhoods in quotation marks, because there isn't a time that it's not there. There isn't a time that it isn't in your brain somewhere. It isn't in yourself somewhere. And that's something I think can be very hard for many people to comprehend who've never experienced it. Talia says, it's having a connection on such a deep level that it's like coming home, the home that we all wish we had, not the ones that we did. Writing does that for me. I think this is referencing back to your connection to music. She says, writing does that for me. Talia is an incredible writer. Neely says, how have you dealt with the abuse that happened within the church? Have there been any specific ways you've moved through that?
Yes. Through the years in dating, or even with my ex, she would attended a congregational church. I would go with her for a bit or with the kids. But I'd always end up leaving halfway through, and I couldn't figure out why. Okay, it never made any sense. I'd stay long enough to see my kids sing in the play or sing in the choir, or my ex sing or whatever, and then I'd have to leave. When all the stuff unfolded for me, again, the breakthrough, 93, 94, I became involved with this small nonprofit called the New Hampshire Incest Center. And they were small, but boy, they did a lot of powerful, great things. They used to get people like Anna Salter, Bessel Vanderkolk to come speak for them. And that's how we would raise our funds. So I started as a volunteer, eventually became a board member. Where I'm going with this, Neely, on the board with two pastors, a husband and wife team, and they had the greatest last name for pastors, Lovejoy. As I got to know them better, because I'm sharing because she was open in the public with this. Her abuse came at the hands of her father, who was a pastor. She turned it around and she became a pastor. And those two exemplified love to me, because anytime people spoke to me about church, I just heard a lot of that, well, yeah, I was being beaten and I was hearing scripture. I was being raped. I was hearing scripture. Cousins of mine, the pastor that was their stepfather did abuse them horribly. So those folks helped me to start, oh, okay. And then I met others through the surviving spirit in my speaking. I have met priests, monks, folks of Jewish faith, leaders, and different spiritual leaders who just talk to me as a human being, who've invited me to speak at their churches or just whatever, or a group, and learning that there are people that embrace what, to me, I just see religion at the core. If it's doing it right, it's love and acceptance and community. So those folks are helping me to understand that no, not everyone attending a church is someone that's going to commit, a crime against you. I had to unlearn all that and unpack that. It was through meeting all these folks and connecting with, and I may have only seen them a couple different times, but they're still in my life. Some of them are still on the mailing list, the Surviving Spirit newsletter. I would start attending churches, but I'd start leaving. It wasn't until I learned later I was being triggered by stuff, because I remember visiting my oldest daughter in California, and she's strong in her faith, and I wanted to support her. I'd go to the church. I could only sit through 20 or 30 minutes, and I'd be, going out to the parking lot, because it was just, I got home and I said, I felt I was letting my daughter down. I don't want to do this, but something was triggered. So it didn't matter the church setting, but once the choir came out and sang, then the light bulb snapped. Oh, because my mother was in the choir. And so I was able to unpack that, if you will, and work through it. So now I can attend the church, and I'm just open with folks. So, but Neely, it's been a long time. That's why I'm grateful for the work that you and your fellow activists, advocates are doing, because it's needed. But again, for folks like me, it's going to take time, and just your actions are going to speak louder than words. I hope that answered the question.
I just want to interject that as someone who grew up in a very religious community, a Catholic community, I too, for other reasons, got the abuse, and the abuse, whether physical, mental, emotional, also sexual, wrapped up into the church. So I rejected it for a very, very long time as an adult. And I wouldn't say that I'm religious per se. I would say I'm more spiritual than anything else. But what I have learned in talking to you, in talking to other people who in the community, people who come to our groups, that kind of thing, there is a whole range of the way people find peace and serenity and healing. And that includes, for many people, Christianity or Buddhism or, the Muslim faith or any of those things. And I've learned to respect that. I've learned to respect people who get positive things out of this. It's a beautiful thing. And the contradiction, I think you mentioned earlier, the contradiction between what you were reading in scripture and what was being done to you, that hit me so hard that it just basically exploded, and I was done with the church. Because here's peace and love and caring. But now I've looked back and I'm like, some of the ideas in the New Testament are pretty groovy. And there are things that I still follow, which are, patience, understanding, love, encouragement, all that stuff. So I think that we have so many different kinds of ways that people heal. And what do you think, since we're talking about the church, because this is always a thorny thing that happens within the group and within discussions. We had a thing going on where in our discussion group where somebody would say they're having this problem, whatever, they're that problem or whatever, and somebody else who is religious would offer prayers. But then the person would be like, but I was abused within the church, please don't offer me prayers, and it was triggering them. And what we concluded was, what you should always do is say, may I offer prayers? And if the person says no, that's triggering, then you don't. What's been your experience with people from different backgrounds, different religious faiths, or people who religion is triggering for them?
When I have been involved in trainings and workshops, and I've been in communities where their faith is very strong, but I would just gently just say, please, what you're saying, just understand, it's hard for me. I can't go to where you're at with this, but I respect and honor where you are. But please don't try to tell me this is what I need to heal, because I have attended churches through the years, and not too long ago, and well-meaning guys and some ladies would just tell me, Michael, you just need to pray more. I remember one friend, and he was very supportive to me. He comes over, this is when I was living in the apartment, after the divorce, and he comes over, and on my coffee table, I'm reading this book on healing from trauma, and he says to me, Michael, that's your problem. I says, what? He says, this book's not going to help you. And he goes over to my bookshelf and he takes off the Bible. He says, this is what you need to heal. And I was saying, David, you don't get it. And so I'd go to the men's group, and this is what was being browbeaten on me. Mike, I have read the Bible a couple different times. I read it at the age of 12 at the start, because I wanted to understand, where's all this stuff coming from? So that, and I've had others that do that same thing. You just need to pray more. You need to forgive. No, please maybe just embrace me, and maybe I don't need to forgive to heal. I feel bad for my parents, but your belief system, I honor that. I do, but you can't impose that upon me. And I'm certainly not going to say, oh, because I was abused, I don't want you to have faith. No, that would be wrong. That would be disingenuous. So I think just trust is going to get us there, and just taking time to build connections.
That's beautiful, because that's kind of the way, the approach that I have is to take people from where they're coming from. And as long as we can communicate with each other, and as long as both minds are open, there doesn't need to be a conflict. Let's go to a few more questions. Let's see, Neely is saying, thanks, that's really insightful. A lot of people are traumatized by the church. It's really hard for pastors to help them through. But the example of Pastor Lovejoy shows that we have to embody healing from our own traumas. Yeah, that was very beautiful, the way that you put that, Michael. And Neely saying, yes, consent is vital. I suspect that's to what I said about, can I offer you prayers? And yeah, I agree 100%. We need to, I want to say something quickly about consent, and then I'm going to ask you about consent. I feel like as trauma survivors, as fellow trauma survivors, consent is something that we were denied as children or denied as adults when we were, our agency was taken away. There was no such thing as consent, and we can't consent because we're kids, or because we're pressured, or because of the stature of the person who's doing this. And I think that it's great that within the survivor community, I have experienced this ongoing conversation about consent, where we're offering each other opportunities to consent. Do you want to talk about this? Do you not want to talk about this? I will respect your boundaries. What are your feelings about consent in terms of the way we talk to each other in the community?
Oh boy, my brain just froze. I think just meeting each other where the person is comfortable, and not pushing doctrine on people. You have to build a relationship, and it can't just be browbeating that, well, this is the way and this is how it works for me and this is going to help you, because it won't if you're being pushed. So I think there has to be, we're talking on consent, that there has to be a meeting of the minds, and maybe I'm not always going to agree fully with what the person is sharing, but can we somehow connect as fellow human beings? That's all I'm trying to do.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. As long as we respect each other.
Yeah.
I think that that's beautifully said. That is absolutely beautifully said, as human beings.
Because I've, as a support person, I've been to conferences and workshops for folks who, clergy abuse, and a lot of it was, the Catholic Church. And I've heard folks that they will never go back to the church. And I've heard folks, and I know folks that it was still their healing grace. I once spoke at the National Press Club, and I was addressing stuff, and a journalist got me there to speak, and it was really heavy duty. It was addressing what the Catholic Church was doing and stuff. In the room were dozens of priests and monks and everything. I thought I was going to be hung after. I spoke, I said my thing as an advocate, activist, and I had a prepared speech, but I also just spoke off the cuff because I didn't know if I was going to be overwhelmed. Long story short, all those priests, pastors, they all came forward and hugged me, and they had all been abused, but yet they were clergy. They all came and asked me, can I hug? And there was this big group hug, and it was like, I was like, because when they were all coming up towards this where I was speaking, I thought they're going to hit me some, but it was the total opposite. So that was a transformative moment. That's always etched in my mind. That was a great time.
There's a couple more things about religion right now, but I'm going to skip over this for now because I want to go back to something that Larry is talking about, that we talked about earlier, which is forgiveness. And this is his response to what you were saying. He says, and totally agreed, we do not need to forgive. My strategy is to tell myself to move on, but forgive forget it. I will just quickly say my feeling about it is, if forgiving heals you, forgive. If forgiving doesn't heal you, don't forgive. Because I don't forgive, because forgiveness would actually hurt my healing. What are your thoughts on the impact forgiveness would have for you if you tried to do that?
I'd be disingenuous. I wouldn't believe in it. Again, not to upset folks, but there was a time in my life I wanted to go to my father's grave and just drive a stake through it, thinking of him as Dracula. I don't have those thoughts anymore. There's actually compassion in my heart for what my mother's still alive, what went through his children. So I don't have that rage. I don't have hatred, but I don't need to forgive them. But I don't want to drive a stake into their gravesite anymore. There's actually compassion. But as you said, Michael, if forgiveness is helping them go, I have dozens of friends who have forgiven their abusers, and that's fine. I've heard, people who've lost children to violence, forgiving the perpetrators, and that's okay for them. It's not mine to judge. More power to them, but it's just, I can't go there. And please just understand that. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person, or I haven't approached healing, or I'm not doing something right. That's just the path that I have. It's just how I feel. Two of my brothers are lost to suicide. I have a lot of anger and frustration at what went on in that home. My two other siblings don't talk to me because I shared the family secret. So there was a huge impact what happened in that home. So if the best that I can do is have compassion for them as human beings and what they experienced in life, and angry at what they did, but I don't want to be bitter. I don't hate them. I don't hate them. So. You're muted, Mike.
This is a professional production. I muted myself. Neely says, yes, Jesus didn't do that. He asked before healing someone, do you want to be healed? Which, of course, is a huge difference, right? Between demanding somebody forgive and saying, do you want to be healed? And as I said earlier, Jesus had some pretty groovy things to say that that's still with me today from my religious upbringing that I still follow. And I think it goes back to something you said earlier, Michael, about you have to meet people where they are. We have to meet each other where we are and respect where each of us are. We're getting close to the end of our hour. These things always go by so fast. I'm just going to quickly read two things that were said, not necessarily for responses, but I want to make sure that I get these things said because they're wonderful comments. Larry said earlier when we were talking about religion, on the topic of religious folks trying to offer prayers, my thought is that they're following the lead of their church leaders, whose goal is mainly to control the narrative to prevent the discussion from getting into areas where they would be in great difficulty. Actually, as I read through this, maybe we should respond to that. Do you think that not all religious leaders, but certainly some religious leaders want to stay away from it because it would cause them problems?
I think there's some that want to control the narrative, and others, no, they're open and they want folks to heal.
J6 says, I unfortunately have a 5 p.m. commitment related to our advocacy work during the current Oregon legislative session. Thank you so much for this great presentation. I want to say, J6, you're amazing, and I really want to know more about the work that you do, so feel free to contact me.
He does great stuff. He's a wonderful human being, advocate. Yeah.
I would love to hear what he's doing, and I would love to be able to promote what he's doing. Neely says, I think it can be different as religious leaders become more trauma informed. Talia says, always ask for permission. For so many of us, all of us, we never had the chance to say no. And I think it is so important to have that now. Okay, I want to talk about this for a second. Asking permission. Do you, the people that are around you now, have you let them understand that when they approach you, it is good for your mental health for them to ask permission about various things?
No, probably
No?
not. No, no,
Fair enough.
I go into settings, I'm just open. If someone starts, I'll just use browbeating or something, then I'll say something, but I don't lay the groundwork. I don't say that up front, no.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about consent and about permission, about all those things. And I think it's a thing we wander into a lot. But like you, I don't necessarily have I say I'm going to have this discussion now. It just it depends upon the relationship. We are very close to the end. This zoomed by as usual. So this is the point where I want to ask you, Michael, is there anything else you want to talk about, you want to share before we go?
To folks out there that who've been hurt in life, you deserve peace, you deserve joy, the things I've spoken about. You deserve love, you deserve life. I think it's out there for all of us. I do. Healing from trauma is a journey, and there's no cookie cutter approach. It takes time. I'm 68 years old now, and this stuff still comes back to kick me in the butt or knock me down. And I, supposedly an expert on trauma, it takes time. And even when you're getting to a point that things are okay, something may come back up and bite you, but maybe it's because we're in a better place to deal with it. I want to think of it that way. I don't, but I could be wrong, but for myself, I've just learned that this is going to be a lifetime healing. However long I have on this earth, I'll always be healing. And I think that's true for all of us. And find out, what works for you, borrow, steal from all of us, but also what's inside of you. That's what I've heard a lot of great people, and okay, I'll borrow this, but sometimes what they were doing wasn't working for me. So, and vice versa. So, follow your heart. Listen to that inner voice inside. It was given to us for a reason, and just, enjoy life as best you can, and find good people around you. Why? Because you deserve it.
Love that. You deserve it. You deserve it. That's magnificent. We deserve it. We deserve a good life, and we deserve respect, and we deserve happiness. There's a couple things I want to say just before we go, so everybody knows how to get a hold of us if they need to. If you want to be alerted to everything that we do these events, but we also do support groups on Zoom. And we do poetry readings, survivor poetry readings on Zoom. If you wanted to be interviewed in one of these things, etc., you subscribe to our mailing list at tinyletter.com/askasurvivor. That's tinyletter.com/askasurvivor. And you can contact us, as in me, at askasurvivor@gmail.com, askasurvivor@gmail.com. That's for anyone who wants to be interviewed in one of these events, anybody who has poetry they want to share, anybody who wants to do, who has any ideas of how we could, better share with each other. The point of what Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor does is to amplify survivor voices. So that is your voice that we want to amplify. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. And Neely says, great, last thing. Yes, what's inside of us, what's inside of you can be evoked for recovery. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Can be evoked for recovery.
Yeah, and you gotta learn what Neely is doing. So
Definitely.
yeah,
Neely, contact me, Neely.
I can
Please.
connect you. And Neil, if it's okay,
Please.
you can send me an email. I'll forward your info to Michael. I've known Michael for years, and I've just I'm doing some work with Neely, and she's doing great things. So yes.
That's marvelous. That's magnificent. So yeah, hopefully we'll get that together and we'll get her maybe on one of these or we'll help with what she's doing and how she's approaching it. I want to thank you again, Michael, for taking the time tonight to do this. I truly appreciate it. I want to thank everyone who was here tonight for your marvelous questions, for your support. And I hope to see you all again at the next one. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all. Thank you.